Have you ever heard of someone vanishing in the middle of a crowded ski resort and turning up nearly 3,000 miles away with no memory of how they got there? The story of Konstantinos Danny Philippidis isn't just strange, it's the kind of mystery that leaves both investigators and doctors shaking their heads years later. Danny was 49 years old, a seasoned firefighter from Toronto, Canada. Among his colleagues, he was known for his calm under pressure and easygoing humor, the kind of man who could make even the longest shift at the firehouse a little lighter. He wasn't reckless or prone to risky stunts. His friends describe him as careful, steady, and responsible, qualities that made his sudden disappearance all the more baffling. It was Wednesday, February 7, 2018, and Danny was spending the last day of an annual ski trip with 8 friends, all off-duty or retired firefighters. Their destination, Whiteface Mountain in Wilmington, New York. One of the highest peaks in the Adirondacks, Whiteface is a place of raw beauty and sudden danger. The slopes wind through thick stands of pine and birch with sharp turns that can hide rocks, trees, or sudden drop-offs. The air that day was crisp and biting, carrying the faint resin scent of the forest, and the snow was packed firm from days of cold weather. This was tradition for them, a winter escape before heading back to the grind. They had skied hard all week, laughing over evening dinners and swapping old firehouse stories. But now the trip was coming to an end. They were set to leave for home soon, and at about 2:30 that afternoon, one of the group admitted they were spent and suggested they call it a day. Danny hesitated. He wasn't ready to say goodbye to the mountain just yet. One last run, he told them, his green ski jacket bright against the dull gray of the overcast sky. They agreed to meet him later at the lodge halfway down the mountain, a familiar rendezvous spot, while he enjoyed that final glide down the slopes. It was the kind of decision countless skiers make every day. But that choice would mark the beginning of one of the most puzzling disappearances in recent memory. As Danny set off, the weather began to turn. A sudden snowstorm rolled, in the kind that seems to come out of nowhere in the Adirondacks. Flakes swirled thick and fast, stinging the skin and clinging to goggles. The visibility dropped sharply. One moment the trees were clear, and the next they were ghostly silhouettes. Skiers on the slopes slowed to cautious, deliberate turns, their outlines barely visible through the white curtain. Danny's friends waited in the lodge, sipping hot drinks, occasionally glancing toward the windows to see if he'd appear. Minutes passed, then more minutes. They weren't worried at first. After all, the weather could slow anyone down. But by 4 o'clock, the lifts shut down for the day, and still no sign of Danny. Concern began to gnaw at them. Another 30 minutes ticked by before they decided something was definitely wrong. They started with the obvious. Maybe he'd gone back to the resort to change, or decided to wait for them there. But when they reached the resort, his car was untouched, his passport, phone, and ID exactly where he'd left them that morning. That discovery landed like a punch. Without those things, where could he have gone? And why hadn't he returned? Panic began to ripple through the group. They alerted ski patrol and forest rangers immediately. The search began almost at once, teams sweeping the mountain on skis and snowmobiles calling his name into the storm. The air was sharp with the scent of snow and pine, and every sound, the crunch of boots, the hiss of wind, seemed amplified in the tense silence between calls. Darkness crept in early, as it does in winter, and the worsening snowstorm turned the mountain into a shifting maze of white. By the next morning, Thursday, February 8th, the situation had escalated into a full-scale rescue operation. Danny wasn't just another skier who had taken a wrong turn. He was a trained firefighter, an experienced outdoorsman, and a man whose friends swore he wouldn't wander recklessly into trouble. That made his silence all the more alarming. More searchers joined the effort. The slopes of Whiteface Mountain were soon crawling with people. New York State Police, Homeland Security agents, U.S. Border Patrol officers, local volunteers, and eventually over 100 Toronto firefighters who dropped everything to help. Colleagues back home took extra shifts so the rescuers could focus solely on finding their missing friend. The scene on the mountain was surreal. The snowstorm had left fresh drifts that made tracking nearly impossible. Searchers trudged through waist-deep snow in some areas, their bright jackets moving in slow lines through the trees. The air buzzed with the low hum of helicopters slicing through the clouds, their searchlights cutting pale arcs against the dark forest. Drones whirred overhead, sending back grainy images of white slopes and shadowed gullies. On the ground, sniffer dogs bounded through the powder noses, down tails rigid, but each time they came back empty. Danny's description, green ski jacket, black helmet, goggles, red skis, was posted everywhere. Search coordinators kept radios pressed to their ears, waiting for that first call of "We've got him." But it never came. every lead fizzled into nothing. For 6 days, the search pushed on. Temperatures dipped dangerously low at night, and the thought of anyone surviving out there without shelter grew dimmer with each passing hour. Danny's wife was there in Lake Placid, bundled against the cold, walking alongside search teams and clinging to hope. She spoke with rescuers daily, her voice steady, but her eyes betraying exhaustion. Friends began to steel themselves for bad news, even as they refused to give up. Then on Tuesday, February 13th, the 6th day of the search, everything changed. That morning around 9:30, Danny's wife was meeting with the search party when her phone rang from an unfamiliar number. She answered and froze. The voice on the other end was unmistakable. It was Danny. He called her by her nickname just as he always did. But what he said next was beyond belief. He was standing alone in Sacramento International Airport in California. California, nearly 3,000 miles from the place he had vanished. The call was short. She told him to get help immediately, to speak with police or airport staff. Law enforcement moved fast. Within minutes of her alert, officers located Danny in the rental car terminal. He was still dressed exactly as he had been on the mountain 6 days earlier. Ski jacket, ski pants, boots, goggles, and helmet in hand. His clothes were weathered from days of wear, but he appeared physically unharmed. Something was clearly wrong, though. When deputies asked him the color of a nearby blue sign, he confidently said green. He couldn't recall the date. His thoughts seemed scattered, his memory fractured, and yet along with his ski gear he carried a brand new iPhone, a credit card, and $1,000 in cash. His hair was freshly cut. None of it made sense. Danny told officers he didn't remember how he got there, but suspected he'd suffered a head injury. He vaguely recalled riding in a big rig, sleeping most of the way, and at some point being sick at what he thought was a truck stop. He claimed to have driven through Utah, or at least been told so, but had no idea how many days had passed or how he'd paid for anything along the way. Despite his confusion, hospital staff later confirmed he had no visible head trauma or signs of drug or alcohol use. He was released the same day into the care of law enforcement, who began piecing together his bizarre cross-country journey. In the days that followed, police in both New York and California appealed for the mysterious truck driver to come forward. No one did. They released a photograph taken of Danny in Sacramento, hoping someone might recognize him and fill in the missing hours. But the silence remained unbroken. When Danny returned to the Adirondacks to speak with police, the meeting was quiet, almost guarded. Investigators hoped the familiar surroundings might stir something in his memory. But even standing on the same mountain where it all began, he could only offer fragments. 6 months after the incident, he finally shared his own version of events in an interview. His voice was calm, matter-of-fact, but the gaps were impossible to ignore. He said he remembered taking what he thought was the right path back to the lodge that afternoon, and then nothing. When he came to, he believed he was heading toward the main ski lodge, but the building was shuttered and empty. Investigators later determined he had likely stumbled into the children's ski area, closed at the time. Still dazed, he made his way down and somehow hailed a passing truck. He could not describe the driver in any detail. Not the man's age, not his appearance, not even the company logo on the truck. He thought the name was something common, ordinary, but couldn't be certain. He said he was in and out of consciousness for much of the ride, plagued by headaches and an overwhelming need to sleep. He vaguely remembered being sick at a rest stop and hearing they had passed through Utah. And then, almost abruptly, they were in Sacramento. The driver told him they had arrived, dropped him off, and vanished. Alone in downtown Sacramento with no ID and no phone, Danny withdrew $1,000 in cash from his credit card, something he didn't remember doing until told later, and bought a new iPhone. Oddly, he couldn't recall his wife's number right away. Instead, he searched for Whiteface Mountain online and was stunned to see his own face in news reports listed as a missing person. That night, instead of going directly to police, he slept outdoors near Richards Boulevard, the roar of Interstate 5 in the distance, headlights streaking through the dark. The next day, still wearing his ski clothes, he caught a ride to Sacramento Airport. Somewhere between the rental car counters and the terminal's sliding glass doors, his wife's number surfaced in his mind. He called. Minutes later, law enforcement found him. Doctors in Toronto offered 2 leading theories for his 6-day ordeal. The first came from Dr. Charles Tator, a respected brain surgeon who believed Danny may have suffered a concussion that triggered both retrograde amnesia, the loss of memories from before an injury, and anterograde amnesia, the inability to form new memories after the injury. It would explain his confusion, the lost hours, and his disorientation. But even Dr. Tator admitted the length of Danny's memory gap was far beyond the usual window for concussion-related amnesia. The second theory came from Dr. Jennifer Ryan, a senior scientist at Toronto's Rotman Research Institute. She proposed Danny had entered a dissociative fugue state, a rare condition often brought on by trauma, intense stress, or injury. In this state, a person can lose their sense of identity, travel long distances, and behave in ways that appear deliberate, yet retain no memory of the journey. People in a fugue can seem entirely lucid to strangers, even as they remain mentally detached from their real lives. But again, even this diagnosis couldn't account for every detail: the haircut, the new phone, the cash withdrawal, without raising more questions than it answered. Some people who experience fugue never recover the missing time. The brain simply walls off the memories like a locked room without a key. For Danny, that might mean the truth: every face, every mile of the journey, every word spoken inside that truck will remain hidden forever. In the end, the case of Konstantinos Danny Philippidis remains unsolved. He returned to Toronto, back to his post as a captain with the fire service, his life seemingly restored. But for 6 days in February 2018, he was gone, not just from the Adirondacks, not just from his friends, but from himself.